Hi everyone, this is a sort of week 2.5 video. Just a couple of things I wanted to mention. Oh, by the way, this is my home office. So there's a window there with sunlight streaming in, hence the half-shut blinds. So anyway, there's a couple of scenes you're going to see me in for these videos. But without further ado, I've just posted a couple of resource videos onto the LMS. If it's not there right now, this is Monday morning, it should be up by the end of today or, at the latest tomorrow. So I've got just some brief instructional videos for people who don't have a background in law. So one is on legal research generally, which shows you where to find things and what some basic websites are, and also if you don't know how to use Google Scholar so that you get Sydney Uni Library links, it shows you how to do that in the video. There's also a little video which is a summary, really simple summary of how to read and find cases, and another one on reading and interpreting legislation. So they're actually just really simple how-to videos for anyone who isn't doing a law master's and who might just want to brush up a little bit on some of those basic things. Also, the reading for this week, week 3, has changed a little bit. So I had initially expected that I would have recorded an interview with Miko Kumar, but Miko is a busy barrister, so I didn't manage to find a slot in her diary to do that. So I've replaced the interview with a reading, and Miko will be at our workshop. So we'll have a chance to talk to Miko at the workshop and ask questions about some of the evidentiary matters which are becoming apparent as potentially complicating issues when we're looking at introducing some types of neuroscience evidence in court. Not all types, and we've had a little bit of discussion about this on the Facebook discussion page. So there's a lot of neuroscience evidence, old, well-established structural MRIs and so on, that are just a standard part of evidence in court, where you've got, a structural MRI or a CT scan or something like that that shows certain lesions on the brain which are well known to be correlated with certain behavioural deficits. So whether it's volitional issues or cognitive issues and so on. So those sorts of things are straightforward and now well accepted in courts and are almost run-of-the-mill, in fact, where people are using psychiatric type defences, particularly in criminal matters or where people are looking for compensation. But other more complex types of neuroscience evidence, like functional MRIs, which are, population data, for example. So neuroscience, which is based on summaries of findings across large populations, where they'll say, for example, that certain types of PTSD is correlated with a reduction in grey matter in the brain. Can you really say anything about an individual if you've got an fMRI showing their particular utilisation of the cortex and so on? We probably can't. A lot of this data is about, how whole populations tend to react, rather than being able to take an fMRI or a structural MRI of somebody's brain and to be able to point to it and say, you can see these features correlate with certain, behaviours or certain symptoms. So the newer types of research are not necessarily at the point where we can introduce them into evidence, and that's partly because either the science isn't bedded down properly, or we're not able yet to draw a clear line between population data and what an individual does, and that's a question of relevance. So that's something that we're looking at in week 3. I've also changed the Morse reading to one that is a little more accessible. The library link that I had wasn't working correctly, so we replaced it with a reading from a journal. So that what is current now on Monday morning is the current readings for the week. If you did happen to be ahead and read the Morse article that was listed over the weekend, that's fine. They actually cover much the same ground, so don't worry about having to do anything else. I've had a look at the data from the quizzes from week 2, and it's great. So almost all of you have done the quizzes except some newly enrolled people, and it looks like people did very well. The quizzes are designed really to be simple. They're just essentially a comprehension test to show that you've been doing the readings, that you've identified some of the key issues, and that you're across the course as we go along. So the marks that you get aren't really important to us. What's important is that you're doing the readings, that you're attending, and that you're building an understanding of these concepts that do sort of build on each other as the course progresses. We've had some interesting discussion on Facebook as well about the readings last week. So one of our students who has a neuroscience background was interested in Dan Dennett's thoughts about folk psychology, and I think that some people with neuroscience backgrounds actually find what he's saying quite obvious, whereas for a lot of lawyers, and certainly for me, when I read Dan Dennett's explanation of folk psychology, for me that really made me see how the way that we normally think about, why people do things, how we anticipate what people do, is actually a construct that may not really have a basis in objective reality. It is a good way of predicting how people will tend to behave, but it's not necessarily the way it goes. So in the same way, you can talk about your air conditioner, for example, wanting to reach the set temperature, and if it doesn't reach the set temperature, it must be because there's something stopping it from doing it, or something like that. But of course, the air conditioner really doesn't sort of want anything, and perhaps we humans, although we feel as though we have wants and desires and needs, and we feel as though we do things for reasons, perhaps it is a bit more mechanical than we're used to thinking about it. But folk psychology is nevertheless the way that we tend to approach the world, and it's certainly that is the basic way that all humans see each other's actions. It's the basic way that we interpret each other's actions, and it's certainly the way that the law looks at responsibility, like that people do things for reasons, that people might have a reasonable excuse or not, and if they don't, then they've failed to take the appropriate course, and they ought to be punished, not just to deter that person specifically from doing the bad thing that they did, but also to set an example to other people, so that other people will see that if you do the wrong thing and you don't choose the right thing, that you too will be liable for punishment. So Dan Dennett uses these concepts to later critique them, but I found his description of what folk psychology is, he actually invented the term, or so he says, to be a very nice, potted description of what a lot of writers mean when they refer to folk psychology, and you see that being referred to in the readings over and over again. Also, one of our neuroscience students, or one of our students with a neuroscience background, felt that Stephen Morse was being very down on neuroscience and on the value that it can have, and I think that is actually not necessarily the case, although I can imagine that you might get that impression from reading a single Morse article. So this student thought that Morse was being alarmist and trying to create panic and scare the reader or the audience about the potential consequences of incorporating neuroscience findings into the legal system by stating that neuroscience might lead to this sort of hard determinism, and it might lead to, an end to law as we know it. But there are writers who do argue that, but it does seem to be a bit far-fetched, really. There's certainly no signs of that. And what Stephen Morse is really about is about saying, look, there are some sort of apocalyptic type views about neuroscience. There are some writers who say, in showing how the brain works, we will show that everything we do is determined just by, neural circuits in our environment. We're no more thinking agents with free will than, a plant or a cockroach or something like that. But actually, Dan Dennett almost verges on that sometimes. But Morse says, I just don't think that's going to happen, because the second that you try to abandon law on the basis that we're all determined, what would we do then? Really we need law. That's the way we live. That apocalyptic scenario really isn't going to happen. You've got to look at law on its own terms. Law is about behaviour. What can neuroscience tell us about individuals' behaviour right at the moment that we can't tell just by looking at them? So really what Morse is about, and we see that again in the article this week, is to say that whole alarmist idea that, the law as we know it is going to disintegrate under the influence of what we understand about how human brains work and how our behaviour is created by the brain. That whole sort of apocalyptic scenario is not going to happen. It's silly. Really, all neuroscience is going to do is going to further bolster behavioural claims that we already have. And what he also says is, if people's behaviour, if what they do doesn't match up with the science, it's still behaviour that's going to be more persuasive. So if you're going to say, yes, this person who recklessly killed his wife has got, we can show from brain scans that, he's got a lesion or a tumour that's correlated with this kind of, recklessness and poor behaviour. That won't be exculpatory if you can show that, but how come every other day he was fine going to work? He ran a little unit. He had, 8 people working for him. He wasn't prone to any outrageous outbursts. He seemed actually to be able to exercise control a lot of the time. Then, I'm skeptical about what you're really saying about this neuroscience evidence. So Morse really says that it's going to be of limited interest to the law for quite some time. Still, it's really going to, neuroscience is really going to be useful to bolster behavioural cases that you already have, but it's unlikely to either win the day, and nor is it likely to sort of explode law as we know it. So that's really the last of my wrap up from the end of last week and from the start of this week. It's terrific to see some discussion about the readings on our Facebook page. That's really been the main centre of discussion. As I said, you can also post on the discussion board, but you're unlikely to get as much to and fro as we've got on the Facebook page. Keep comments coming. Keep discussions about the readings, any questions or comments you have coming. It's great to see them. It's great to be able to get a feel for how you're responding to them, and to help guide your further inquiry. So I'll see you next week at the workshop, and at the end of this week I'll post a wrap up as well about any discussions or any further news. See you later.